Hi guys, it's time to say a few words about controllers and what they are in AngularJs. Bear in mind that my goal is to teach you a few AngularJS best practice from the very beginning of this course, so that you'll be sure to get the best out of this amazing framework. Let's take a look at what a controller is in Angular and what is its role. So, as you can see from the title of the fourth slide, a controller holds the presentational logic for our application. Why did I mention best practice? Because you might find somewhere tutorials, introductive tutorials, saying that in the controller you should basically hold the business logic of your application. But if you dig deeper, you'll find out that actually is not a proper pattern. And the best way to deal with business logic is to use factory and services. Controllers should implement the presentational logic for the front end and the scope initialization only. So use them for these purposes only and stay away from doing the following things with controllers. Implement business logic, as we said. Manipulate the DOM. Formatting input. Filter output. For each of them, Angular provides a better technique, services for business logic, data binding and directives to manipulate the DOM, forms controls to format inputs and filters to filter output. We'll be discussing about each one of these features in the next few lessons. Now, how do we declare a controller? Let's go back to our application. If you remember, we had the first name. I've added a label here, and whenever somebody types into the input field something, automatically the view updates and shows what the user is typing. To do that, we have simply used the data binding and ngModel, our first directive. Now, let's say that we want a controller to define the actual data that should be shown on the page and maybe initialize the input text field with a given value. Let's add also another few text fields like last name as well. So I'll just copy this and paste it. This will be my label for last name, same here, and our ngModel this time will be last name. And we want to print down below, hello. Let's keep first name as well as last name. That's it. Let's just refresh our page. So in here we'll put Alex Russo and you'll see that it gets printed in the output. That's fine. Now let's move to the controller. We want to go back to our app.js, and in the next line we'll do something like my app.controller. We'll give it a name like my controller. And then we'll pass in a function which will be our scope. Okay? And we close the brackets. Actually, we'll open these ones. So in here we just have to add our implementation. As you can see, I've injected the scope, and if you remember, the scope is our basically data model. So let's try to initialize something like $scope.first name equals trainee and $scope.last name equals RUSSO, my last name. Okay? So let's refresh our page and see what happens. Basically nothing happens. And the reason why is because it's not sufficient to declare an Angular controller, but we also need to include the controller in our HTML. So in here, in our starter template, which is the div that includes all of our fields, we'll add ng-controller equals my controller. Like here, you see? My controller. Let's try to refresh our home page again. And as you can see, the input text fields are pre-populated with the values that we have configured in our $scope variables, and the output shows hello trainee Russo. Let's have again a look at what we've just done. We have added ng-controller in our element, which is the starter template, a div, which includes everything that we want to be managed from that controller. So basically this means that if I copy the text part and I put that outside this element and I refresh my page, you will notice that even in here it's still displayed, but down below there's nothing because this specific area doesn't know anything about our my controller. Sounds good? So let's get rid of this. Let's refresh our page once again. We're back to where we were before. So let's look also at the app.js. We have declared myApp.controller, so we're basically saying that the controller we're going to declare is part of this module, our myFirstApp module. And to do so, we use the object that is returned by Angular.module to bind the controller as well. The first parameter is actually the name of the controller. The second one is the function with the eventual injections. Between double curly brackets, we have all of our implementation. $scope first name defines the value for the ng model first name, while $scope.last name defines the value for the last name ng model variable. There's something else we can do with our controller. We can define a function that will be invoked directly from the template and will add some behavior to our page. Actually, what I'm going to do again is not a best practice, and you should really invoke whatever function is responsible to either get the data, create it, or update it, or delete it from a service. So your controller will invoke the service responsible for those kind of operation. But anyway, just for the purpose of this lesson, just to show you what you can do with controllers, let's do that. So let's create our $scope.print name. So we're going to actually generate this output here through a function. Print name equals function, double curly brackets, and this will just do return $scope.first name plus, let's add a space, plus $scope.last name, and that's it. So let's save it, and in our index.html we need to replace our expression with print name like this. So let's save it, let's refresh our page, and as you can see it's still working, it's still showing the same output, so we can actually pass parameter to the function if we need to. There are lots of things we can actually do with controllers. So why don't you take the code that is attached to this lesson, try to change it a little, experiment with controller using the basic notions that I teach you in this lesson. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I'll see you in the next lesson where we'll talk about how to implement a controller by using a best practice, which is controller as a syntax. So we'll get rid of the $scope and we'll talk about a few problems that can be generated if you actually use this implementation I showed you. And there are way too many people that are still implementing controllers by adding everything to the scope. Well, there are better ways to do that. See you in the next lesson, guys.